Hi, it's Ray Grant. It is Tuesday, November 7th, 2023. It's 11:32 a.m. here in Pittsburgh. This is the second installment of my Zodiac Killer walkthrough. I will be walking the viewer through the Zodiac crimes in a no frills manner. I'm going to talk about the Lake Herman Road murders. David Faraday was 17 years old. He met Betty Lou Jensen, who was 16, at the Pythian Castle, 2618 Sonoma Boulevard in Vallejo, where they were decorating a hall. That happened December 14th, 1968. For the on Saturday, for the following week, David was driving from Vallejo High School to Hogan High School to visit at lunchtime to visit Betty Lou, and also to drive her home after school and drive some of her friends home. Um, Betty Lou's sister, older sister Melody Job, who was 24, suggested that Betty Lou take David home to meet her parents, and that way it would might allow them to have a dating relationship. Her parents had forbidden Betty Lou to have any boyfriends after a date that went south resulted in her older sister Melody becoming pregnant. So the Jensen parents were fairly strict. Her dad was a retired military officer. So the date was set up for Friday, December 20th, 1968. David left his house at 1930 Sereno Drive around 7:30. His mother, Jean Faraday, gave him $1.55 in all in change. He drove his mother's Faraday, his mother's Rambler station wagon, and he left the house around 7:30. Arrived at the Jensen home around 8 o'clock. Since Google Maps suggests that the trip should have taken less than 10 minutes, the reason that David was late was that it took longer for David to get there was probably because he stopped for gas on the way. His mother gave him $1.55. When his body was searched after his death, he was found to have 85 cents in his pockets. So 70 cents went missing, and probably because he stopped for gas. A gallon of gas in 1968, which would have cost 35 cents. So if he bought 2 gallons of gas, that would have been 70 cents. Plus, there was no such thing as self-serve in 1968. If you pulled into a gas station, an attendant had to put the gas in your tank, and he would usually squeegee your front windshield and lift your hood and check your oil. So the stopping for gas would explain two things. It would explain why 70 cents went missing from David's pocket. It would also explain why it took him from 7:30 until 8 o'clock to arrive at Betty Lou's house. Betty Lou and her parents lived at 123 Ridgewood Court. When David arrived, their parents were told that they were going to attend a concert at a Christmas concert at Hogan High. There was no Christmas concert at Hogan High that night. I am informed by the poster VT Esquire on Reddit. Used to go by I don't think he ever went by Todd the Plumber, but we also call him that. That the Christmas concert, this was news to me, the Christmas concert actually took place the week before on Friday, December 13th, 2023. That sounds more like it. Usually any kind of Christmas musical events precedes the Christmas holiday by at least a week, if not more. A lot of times they come in the first week of December. So anyway, I have no idea why David told her parents that they were going to a Christmas concert. I assume that he did it to, present some sort of very innocent pretext for their date. They also said they might attend one of three Christmas parties that were held that night. But the source for all the information about the Christmas concert in the newspapers, when the murders were originally reported on in the Vallejo newspapers, their having attended a Christmas concert that night was mentioned, and this was picked up by various people. It has been picked up by various people in the Zodiac online community who believe that there was a Christmas concert that night, but there wasn't one. And it says that, by the way, in the it also says that in the Solano County Sheriff's Office police report. Um, Betty Lou lived at 123 Ridgewood Court. David and Betty Lou drove from there to 926 Brentwood Avenue, which was the address of Betty Lou's best friend, Sharon Henslin. They were there from roughly 8:20 p.m. until 9 p.m. There was some talk of them possibly going with Sharon's boyfriend to San Francisco, but her boyfriend never showed up. At 9 o'clock, David began to be impatient to leave. David told Sharon that he wanted to give Betty Lou his class ring and ask her to go steady with him. David said that he did not want to go to St. Catherine's parking lot. St. Catherine's was a Catholic church that was up a hill off Tennessee Street, but it was technically private property. David didn't want to go there and then get run off by the police. Sharon suggested to David, in fact, told David that what he should do is take Betty Lou to Blue Rock Springs Park. It is also true that when David was talking to Sharon, he asked Sharon if she thought that Betty Lou would accept the ring and would go steady with him. This would suggest to me that David and Betty Lou had not hugged and kissed prior to their date, that they were still that their whatever relationship they had was still platonic, at least through 9 p.m. of December 20th. So they had not hugged and kissed. So it would be a major development in their relationship if they suddenly drove out to Lake Herman Road and reclined the seat of their car down and started whatever you want to call it, making out, or as the police reports stated, interrupted necking. There is no reason to believe that David and Betty Lou were physically friendly, at least as of the time when they drove away from Sharon's house at 9 p.m. that night. They did not go to the Christmas concert. The place, it seems, that they were most likely to have gone to was Blue Rock Springs Park, since that's what Sharon Henslin told. That's where Sharon Henslin told David to go, and Sharon Henslin also said that she assumed that that's where he was going when they drove away from her house. My belief is that David and Betty Lou drove to Blue Rock Springs Park. They were there they pulled in circa 9:05, 9:10 at Blue Rock Springs Park, and that they were then abducted by three of the Zodiacs, most likely by Gareth Penn, and Michael O'Hare. They were then driven from in their the Rambler station wagon, and the Zodiac car, which was a white Chevy Impala, were driven from Blue Rock Springs Park to Lake Herman Road, and it would have taken probably a little bit over 5 minutes to get to the gate number 10 turnout. There is a field to the east of the gate number 10 turnout. If you go, let's say, 50 yards to the east, you could park a couple of cars there. The ground is level. All you would need to do if there is fencing separating the field from the road is to use a pliers or a bolt cutter to cut the fencing to create enough of a space that a car could drive up into the field. Once the vehicles were more than a few yards off of the road, the headlights of cars on the road would not illuminate the cars that were parked in the field. So, for all intents and purposes, on a pitch dark road with no lighting, they would have been invisible. And this will also explain later on when the Zodiacs parked their car in the gate number 10 turnout and then walk east into what I call the holding area, which, as I said, would have been, let's say, 50 yards to the east of the turnout, and leave their car parked in the turnout. At 9:30 p.m. that night, while the Zodiacs were still, arranging their cars and arranging the teenagers in the holding area, William Crowe and his ex-girlfriend pull onto Lake Herman Road off of Columbus Parkway. It would have taken them about 5 minutes to get to the gate number 10 turnout. William Crowe pulled into the turnout. There were no other cars in the turnout. He had his ex-girlfriend's new sports car facing the road as they were parked in the turnout, and he began playing with the toggle switches on the car dashboard, and he was doing that, let's say, for 5 minutes or so. So Crowe arrives, pulls onto the road at 9:30 p.m. He arrives in the turnout approximately 9:35 p.m. and starts playing with the toggle switches. That is what he is doing circa 9:40 p.m. when a car coming from the east drives slowly past the front of their car, stops, and suddenly Crowe saw the reverse lights coming on, and what Crowe described in 2004 as a light-colored Chevrolet began reversing itself toward the sports car. This freaked William Crowe out. He immediately pulled out onto the road, made a right, and began driving east on Lake Herman Road. The light-colored Chevrolet then pulled into the turnout, turned itself around, and began following the Crowe's sports car. It would increase in speed incrementally as Crowe's car increased in speed. And when Crowe got to Reservoir Road, he made a right, pulling off the road at fairly high speed. The vehicle that had been following him did not make the turn. That vehicle stopped in the road. Crowe looked back at the car. Presumably the people inside what Crowe originally said were two occupants in the car, presumably stared at him. He stared at them. And eventually that car turned around and went back in the direction where it had come. In other words, in the direction of the turnout. Now, a strange thing that happened prior to the car being run off the road is the fact that when the light-colored Chevrolet comes from the east, going past Crowe's sports car, it should not have been able, under normal circumstances, it should not have been able to stop just a few feet past his vehicle and just nonchalantly go into reverse and begin to reverse itself toward his car. if you look at Lake Herman Road, if you're driving west, going past the turnout, you're coming down a hill, and you are veering to the right, and you would see a car parked in the turnout basically at the last minute. So if you're doing the speed limit and probably a little bit more, your average driver will be doing the speed limit on Lake Herman Road would have been 35 miles per hour. So let's say you're doing 40, 41 miles per hour, maybe 45 miles per hour. You aren't going to be able to stop within a car length of a car that you see in the turnout on a night when there would have when it was below freezing and there would have been frost on the surface of the road. A car that did that might very well skid halfway down the hill. So the very fact that the car that ended up chasing Crow off the road was able very easily to pull in front of him, stop, and reverse itself suggests that it wasn't coming from very far away. If the car had been in the holding area, which, as I say, would have been maybe 50 yards to the east of the turnout, and pulled onto the road and was intending to pull into the turnout, and the Zodiacs found that Crow was already parked there, the intention of chasing him out of the turnout was so that they could park their car there and discourage other people from parking there, because that's where they intended to murder the two teenagers. So William Crow pulls off the road circa, let's say, if the he pulls in the turnout at 9:35. He's playing with the toggle switches till 9:40. The 9:40 or so, the car comes by him, reverses, and begins chasing him off the road. Then Crow would have turned off the road, let's say 9:45. The light-colored Chevrolet, which is actually the same as the white Chevy Impala, which will be seen in the turnout by multiple witnesses at 10 o'clock and afterwards. That car reverses back to where the turnout is, pulls in. The two Zodiacs who are inside the car get out of the car. They walk through the dark field. They park the white Chevy Impala facing the south fence. They cross the field, and now they are in the holding area. So again, the reason for doing that is to keep people from parking in the turnout, so that the area of the turnout is essentially reserved for when they end up killing the victims. At 10 p.m. that night, there is a convergence of two people. They have, according to the police reports, William Conley, who says he actually arrived on the road at 9 p.m., but it was much more likely 10 p.m. He passes the gate number 10 turnout. As he is doing so, he sees a truck coming out through gate number 10, and he also sees sees a white Chevy Impala parked face in against the south fence as he drives by. Bingo Wesner, who is tending sheep in the area of the pump house, pulled out through the gate at 10 p.m., sees a white Chevy Impala parked head in against the south fence. And as he is doing that, he sees a red pickup truck, which he says is a Ford. William Conley's truck was actually a Chevy. But he sees a red pickup truck with wood sideboards, which is what William Conley's truck also had on the side. Okay, so the question becomes, who is right about the timing? It sounds like they saw each other. Bingo Wesner sees the white Chevy Impala, sees a car passing the turnout. A red pickup passing the turn with wood sideboards passing the turnout. William Conley, who is driving a red pickup with wood sideboards, sees the white Chevy Impala facing in towards the south fence and sees a truck coming out through gate number 10. So we assume that they saw each other, and that was a single encounter. But William Conley says it happened at 9 o'clock. Bingo Wesner says it happened at 10 o'clock. If you look at the statements made by William Conley, he says that he and Frank Gassner were going to go raccoon hunting that evening. They were going to participate in a recreational activity, and that he was at Frank Gassner's ranch for several hours before they headed out towards Lake Herman Road. Now, maybe their original intent, I don't know whether they were drinking beer or not, or what they were doing recreationally, but maybe their original intent was to go out to Lake Herman Road around 9 o'clock, and they ended up leaving later than that. They left at Frank Gassner's ranch maybe more like 9:30 or so. Bingo Wesner was doing what he did presumably every day, which was tend sheep. He was also a ranch hand at the old Borges Ranch in Walnut Creek, which was about a 30-minute drive east of where the turnout is. So Bingo Wesner would have been coming from the east. He would have made a left into the turnout when he arrived. When he left, which presumably he was doing when he came out through gate number 10, he would have made a right. He would never have gone down the hill. He would have just gone east back to Walnut Creek. So if Bingo Wesner was an hour off in his time estimate, if it was 9 o'clock instead of 10 o'clock, one assumes that by the time he got to the old Borges Ranch, he would have figured out where it would have taken him a half hour to get there. He'd have figured out that it was 9:30 and not 10:30. Okay, because presumably he did the same chores every day, pretty much on a time schedule. Meanwhile, William Conley was engaged in a recreational activity, something they did at the most, let's say maybe once a week. They were going out. He said he was at Frank Gassner's ranch for several hours before they headed out. And after he left the area of the turnout, after he left the Marshall Ranch turnout and drove up the hill and drove out toward Interstate 680, he then spent, I think, another hour or so at Frank Gassner's ranch before he went home. Okay. So William Conley wasn't exactly being time conscious in his activities that night. And the other problem with Conley arriving at 9 o'clock means that they would have been on the hillside hunting raccoons for 2 hours. That means it would have taken them an hour at least to get up the brush on the hillside from the bottom of the hill, which is where the Marshall Ranch turnout was. That's where they parked their pickup, to near the crest of the hill, which is where the turnout was, or certainly at least 2/3 of the way up the hill. And so are we to assume that it would have taken them an hour to do that and then an hour to come back down, or more than an hour maybe? Maybe it took them longer to go up the hill and than it did to come back down. If they were doing that between 9 and 10 o'clock, why didn't William Crow and his girlfriend hear them? Why didn't they hear their guns going off while they were shooting at raccoons? Why didn't they hear their dogs? It doesn't make sense to me that I realize people are going to keep insisting that William Conley arrived there at 9 o'clock, and that is what he said. I think Bingo Wesner's estimate of 10 o'clock is much more likely, particularly because when William Crow pulled into the turnout at 9:35, circa 9:35 p.m., there were no other cars in the turnout, so that Bingo Wesner's estimate fits the time sequence And we are assuming, the only change we are making with Robert Conley's testimony is that he was wrong about the time. He says 9 o'clock. It was actually 10 o'clock. Um, so um, so it's 10 o'clock when Bingo and Robert Conley and Frank Gasser see the white Chevy Impala parked in the turnout. At approximately 10:15 p.m. that night, Helen Ax and her sailor boyfriend, now whether that was her husband or not, I don't know. It says in the police statement, she describes the man as her boyfriend. If Helen Axe's husband was a man named Thomas Ax, who was a sailor. It seems unusual for me for somebody to describe her, for a young woman to describe her husband as her boyfriend, but maybe that was her terminology. They passed the turnout at 10:15 p.m. It is uncertain what the orientation of the parked car that they saw was. They went to the end of the road. They came back at 10:30 p.m. When they came back, the car that was in the turnout was facing the road. So if the car had been facing in at 10:15 p.m., at 10:30 p.m., somebody had moved the car, so it was now facing the road. In between the two sightings, assuming there were two sightings, Frank Gasser, who had been coming up the brush to the west of the turnout, walked out through gate number 10 and shone his flashlight through a parked white Chevy Impala, 1959. I think it was a four-door Impala, 1959, 1960. Shown his flashlight. There was no one inside the car. The car was parked in the turnout. Frank Gasser wondered why anybody would be parked out in the middle of nowhere and would leave their car on a night when it was below freezing and walk off into the pitch darkness where you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. That's how dark it was. Anyway, Frank Gasser sort of shook his head, went back out through gate number 10. I do believe that Helen Ax saw a car parked in the turnout at 10:30 and that the car was facing out. I believe what actually, well, I'll get to what I believe what happened. But when Helen Ax was giving her statement, she used the word recognized, and I think the responding officer thought that she meant that she recognized the station wagon and recognized the victims. My guess is what Helen Ax actually said was there was video footage of the Faraday Rambler parked in a police lot on the news. You can see that when you look at the interviews with Les Lundblad. My guess is what Helen Ax actually said to the responding officer was, when I saw the car on the news, I recognized it as the same car that I saw in the turnout. As I've been saying all these years, I don't think the car that Helen Ax saw was the Faraday Rambler. She didn't know the victims. She wasn't familiar with their car. She wasn't a neighbor of theirs. There's no reason to believe that she knew the victims personally. So I think the word recognized was just misunderstood by the responding officer, just as his suggesting a blue Valiant to William Crowe was a misunderstanding. At least that's my reading of what happened. In any case, if Helen Ax had seen whatever car was parked in the turnout twice, if she had seen it at 10:15 and at 10:30, there wouldn't be any reason for her to suggest that her sailor boyfriend come in and talk to the police. If she could attest to the orientation of the car, both at 10:15 and 10:30, well, that's her statement then. There's no need for any follow-up. SCSO didn't follow up. They didn't talk to the driver of the car afterwards. As I said, my take on that is that Helen Ax did not notice what the car that was parked in the turnout at 10:15, since we know that Frank Gasser would have come out through gate number 10 around 10:20 or so, if it took them an hour to go up the hillside and come back down again. Let's say 10:20 or so. In other words, he would have come out through the gate in between the two sightings, the 10:15 and the 10:15 p.m. and 10:30 sighting, and it is indisputable that the car that he saw was a white Chevrolet 1959, 1960 four-door sedan. So that's the car. That's the car that Frank Gasser saw. We will find out shortly afterwards that Pierre Badu passed the turnout and did not see a car. Didn't see any cars circa 10:40 p.m. So logically, there was only one car in the turnout. There wasn't more than one. We know the Impala was there. The only person who has suggested, or whose testimony seems to suggest, that it was the Rambler was Helen Ax. I think Helen Ax was simply wrong in her identification of the car. I think since she found out that the Rambler had been there, after the murder, she assumed that was the car and she saw it on TV. She assumed that was the car that she saw. But it wasn't. I'm going to take a drink now so that I can go on talking. I'm amazed that my voice has kept up this long. So I don't know if I suffer from a condition called spasmodic dysphonia. And as I was mentioning to Ned DeHaan, I get throat injections every couple of months. So my voice kind of like comes in and out. It's the reason I had an artificial voice for some of my earlier videos. So as long as I'm reasonably, as my voice can be heard, I'm going to try to use it, and it may happen in the next week or so that it's going to disappear again. So, but as long as it's still working, I will continue to talk. Anyway. I believe that Helen Ax was simply wrong in her. I believe everything else that Helen Ax said to be true. In other words, Helen Ax saw a car facing out of the turnout. I believe that's what happened. I believe what happened circa 10:25 p.m. that night is that the Zodiacs were in the holding area. They were listening to a police scanner. Ray Grant had a police scanner in 1969. I used to listen to the police on it. My dad had a scanner, and I used to listen to it all the time. They were portable. You could carry one. It was like having a transistor radio, basically. And a lot of those radios also had shortwave capability. So I believe that the Zodiacs were listening to the police scanner, and that they knew that the police had made a drug bust in the Lake Herman, at the cottage at Lake Herman, which was in the recreation area for Lake Herman, which was a few mile, I don't know, like a mile or so west of the turnout, and that the Benicia police was going to be coming along Lake Herman Road shortly. So it was incumbent upon them to walk back through the field, get into the parked white Chevy Impala, pull out of the turnout so that the Benicia police wouldn't pull into the turnout and investigate their car. And that's what they did. So that's the reason why the car was seen originally parked with the facing in against the south fence, and then they turned it. They came into the turnout around 10:30 or so. Got into the car, turned it around so it was facing the road. Helen Ax and her boyfriend, husband, whoever he was, pass the turnout going west. The Zodiacs pull out of the turnout, make a left out of the turnout, which is the safer of the two options. If they make a right out of the turnout and try to pull up into the holding area, there's the possibility that that a police car is right behind them, close enough that it sees them pulling up into the holding area and investigates, and then they'd be in trouble. So the safer of the two options is for them to pull out of the turnout, make a left, and follow Helen Ax and her boyfriend off the road. Helen Ax and her boyfriend and the Zodiacs drive to the end of Lake Herman Road, and they are seen at the intersection of Columbus Parkway and the western end of Lake Herman Road. Let's say it was around 10:30. Let's say it was 10:35 or so, by Stan, the 14-year-old. And Stan says he saw a blue Oldsmobile, which I assume was the car that was driven by Helen Axe's boyfriend, and he sees a blue 1963 Chevy Impala pull off Lake Herman Road, and there are two people inside it. William Crowe said initially that he saw two Caucasians inside the car that chased him off the road. Stan, the 14-year-old, says that there were two people inside the Impala. Now, I don't know why he thought the car was blue, but it was very dark out. Maybe the car was a powder blue or a light blue. It was described as a white Chevy Impala. I believe it was the same car that was parked in the turnout. If Stan saw what he thought was a Chevy Impala, as I have said elsewhere, the Chevrolet sedans beginning in 1963, 1964 looked pretty much alike. My older sister had a Chevelle 500. There was also the Chevelle Malibu and the Impala, and all of their, whatever you want to call them, mid-size cars, all had pretty much the same boxy design. Whereas the 1959, 1960 Impalas had tail fins in the back, and they had a stripe. Particularly the 1959 model had very exaggerated tail fins, which were going up, and also had a stripe which ran pretty much the length of the side of the car. The 1960 model, the stripe wasn't as long. It was like half the length of the car. And the tail fin, instead of being upwards, was more horizontal. So I tend to believe that the car that was seen in the turnout, seen parked there, was the 1959 Impala. I think the reason that Stan recognized or thought the car was an Impala is that it was a 1959 or maybe a 1960 model and not a 1963. So Stan sees that car pull off Lake Herman Road. I believe the Zodiacs maybe pulled into Blue Rock Springs Park, turned the car around, and got back onto Lake Herman Road and went back towards the turnout. In the meantime, Pierre Bidou and Steve Armenta of Benicia PD pull onto Lake Herman Road circa 10:35. They pass the turnout from the Lake Herman Road, Lake Herman Recreation Area. They pass the turnout circa 10:40. And as Pierre Bidou says, almost at the outset of This Is the Zodiac Speaking documentary that's included with the Fincher movie, he said, as we passed the turnout, we saw no cars there. He also says that he saw no cars on the way to the turnout or in the area of the turnout. So whatever was in the turnout was gone by that time. So what that would mean is that if somebody believes that Betty Lou Jensen, David Faraday were parked. Were parked whenever 10:15, between 10:15 and 10:30. If that is true, then what it means is we have the testimony of police officers who say that there wasn't a car there. So what did they do? Did they pull out? Did they, there wouldn't be any reason. I had somebody said to me, maybe they pulled out so that they would warm the heater up. Anyone who would say that doesn't understand the way cars work. If you turn the car ignition on, the heater's going to come on. Cars back in the 1960s worked that way. I had a 1966 Plymouth Barracuda was my first car. The heater would work as long as the ignition was on. You didn't need to go and drive anywhere to get the heater to work. So there wouldn't have been any reason, if David Faraday had been parked in the turnout, for him to pull out of the turnout. But we know that there was no Rambler in the turnout circa 1040. The other problem that people have suggested, I know Richard Grinnell has tried to suggest that Bideau and Armenta drove directly. Oh, two other things. The first thing is that they had arrested people when they did the drug bust. Pierre Bideau never says anything about arresting anybody. If you look at at what he says they confiscated 1.5 pounds of marijuana. He doesn't say they had, two defendants in the back of the car. At no time does he say anything like that. He says when they pulled into the police lot, they heard the APB. That would have been at 11:28. He doesn't say anything about processing anybody. What I get from that is that people are relying on facts that are not in evidence. There is no reason to believe that any arrest was made. What I believe is what Pierre Bideau said, which is that they confiscated 1.5 pounds of marijuana. They were bringing it back to headquarters to log it into evidence, and that's what was going on. The other problem is, if you use Google Maps and you go from the gate number 10 turnout to Benicia PD headquarters I believe on 2nd Street, Google Maps has that as a 7-minute drive time. So how could Pierre Bideau have driven to the Benicia PD lot such that they pull into the lot at 11:28? If it's 7 minutes, that means that they passed the turnout at 11:21. But that's not possible, because when they passed the turnout, they didn't see any cars in the turnout. How many things have to happen between Pierre Bideau passing the turnout and his pulling into the lot? How much has to happen in that 7-minute time? Well, let's count all the things that have to happen. First of all, the two hunters, Conley and Gasser, have to pass the turnout after Bideau and Armenta pass the turnout, because they see the Rambler in the turnout, and Bideau and Armenta don't. So that's one person. Well, James Owen has to pass the turnout, because he sees the Rambler in a car that's parked to the right of it, parallel to the right of it. So that's two things that have to happen. The third thing that has to happen is the murders have to happen. The fourth thing that has to happen is, after the murderers drive away from the turnout, Stella Medeiros has to pass the turnout and see that the two teenagers on the ground. The fifth thing that has to happen is Stella Medeiros has to drive into Benicia PD going 70 miles an hour, and she sees the Benicia police car at the Enco station on East 2nd Street. And it takes, what, 3 or 4 minutes for her to get there? Presumably, it would have taken at least a few seconds for Stella to explain what she had seen. Then the police have to drive from East 2nd Street, even if they're doing 70 miles an hour, to the gate number 10 turnout. You're talking about another 3 or 4 minutes. And then they have to radio their police operator, and then the dispatcher has to give the APB, which comes at 11:28. So, to make a long story short, could Pierre Badu and Steve Armenta have passed the gate number 10 turnout at 11:21 p.m. that night, as Richard Grinnell says they did? The answer to that is no. Okay. In fact, there's no way that you can have them passing the turnout anytime much before 11 o'clock. I would guess, and I have attempted to contact Pierre Badu in past years and have been unable to do so. But my belief is that what actually happened was, and what is typical for people who make their living outside, as I did as a mailman for 37 years, is that a lot of times when you're done doing whatever your job is, if you're a mailman, you're on your route. If you're a policeman, you're confiscating drugs or what have you. It is very typical for that sort of person, on his way back to headquarters, on my way back to the post office, on their way back to the police headquarters, to stop and get something to eat, and then go in and log the evidence back. That would make sense. It would explain how Pierre Badu could have driven past the turnout circa 11:40 or 10:40 p.m. that night, and then stopped somewhere, maybe had a Coke and some French fries or what have you. In my novel, I point out that since it's Friday and presumably Steve Armenta was Catholic, back then Catholics were not allowed to eat meat on Fridays, so presumably they wouldn't have had a hamburger. But anyway, it is perfectly logical and nothing out of the ordinary if Badu and Armenta had stopped at a Mr. Ed's or someplace like that for 20 minutes to a half hour and then gone back to headquarters. That's what makes sense, and it fits the timeline. So I have Badu and Armenta passing the turnout circa 10:40 p.m. The Zodiacs come back from the western end of the road in the white Chevy Impala circa 10:45, let's say 10:45. They pull again into the holding area, and they get ready to move the Faraday Rambler. In the meantime, circa 10:55 p.m., Peggy Ure and her husband arrive on the road. I've already mentioned ad nauseum, Peggy Ure says she was driving west. This would have been circa 10:55 p.m. that night. She's driving west past the turnout. She said she saw the couple, the two teenagers, inside their car cuddling, and saw Betty Lou Jensen put her head against the shoulder of David Faraday. Again, circa 10:55, and she saw this when her lights flashed on their car as her car was going west. This is not possible. As I said, when you're driving on Lake Herman Road and you pass gate number 10, your car is coming down a hill and the hill veers to the right, away from where the turnout is. Just as when you're coming up the hill, the same curve in the road causes your headlights to illuminate the turnout. The movement down the hill causes your headlights to move away from the turnout. If you look at the video that I have linked to elsewhere of Tom Voight and Ed Neal in that turnout in 2004, Ed Neal is standing where the Rambler would have been parked. And he is not illuminated when a police car passes the turnout going west. He isn't illuminated at all. Okay, there isn't a single photon which hits at Ed Neal when he is standing right where the Faraday station wagon would have been. So Peggy Ure could not have seen what she says she saw. Peggy Ure would have been sitting in the passenger side of her husband's 1967 Grand Prix. She would have had to see past her husband and looked at a Rambler where the window would have been rolled up, and the turnout was not lit. It wouldn't have been lit by their headlights, so she didn't see anything as she's driving left. Then she comes down the road, the bottom of the hill to the Marshall Ranch turnout. Her husband pulls in so that they can turn around. Frank Gasser, who liked shining his flashlight into things, shone his flashlight into the Ure vehicle. Peggy Ure took offense at this. Apparently, she had a very strong personality, and she grabbed the gun off her back seat and pointed it out the window at the hunters and said, "My gun is bigger than yours." Okay, how do we know this? We know it because it's in the police report. We know it because SCSO called Peggy and Homer into the station. They separated them and asked, okay, now what happened in the Marshall Ranch turnout? If you point a gun at somebody and the gun is loaded, that's called reckless endangerment. If you point a gun at somebody and the people believe that the gun might be loaded, even if it isn't, that's still an assault, okay? So Peggy and Homer knew that they didn't want to admit to this, so they denied that Peggy said, "My gun is bigger than yours." It seems like an awfully odd thing for the police to ask Peggy if it didn't happen, if there wasn't some basis in it, if the hunters weren't quoting Peggy verbatim. It seems like an odd thing for the police to say, did you tell the hunters that your gun was bigger than theirs? I mean, you know. So what do we have with Peggy Ure? She says her headlights flashed on the Faraday Rambler when that couldn't have happened. Peggy Ure says she didn't tell the hunters that her gun was bigger than theirs. I think she did. I think everybody else believes she did. Peggy is a liar. The third thing we know about Peggy Ure is that after Homer turns the car around and they go back up the hill, Peggy is staring out the back window of the car, expecting the hunters to come after them because they had this confrontation. And frankly, the hunters outgunned them. Plus, the hunters had dogs. So anyway, Peggy Ure wasn't worried about what was going on in the turnout. Peggy Ure didn't even know that anything had happened in the turnout till the next day, and she heard about the two murders. And I'm guessing, wanting to thrust herself into the midst of the double murder, she calls up the police and tells them, "Oh yeah, I saw the couple cuddling, as we passed them, and they were doing the same thing when we came back up." In my book in 2015, I assumed that Peggy Ure had actually seen the Rambler there, and she was just wrong about seeing the couple inside. When I was doing my videos that are also on this channel, and I was doing Lake Herman Road, and I noticed that Robert Conley had insisted that he saw the Rambler parked on the right side of the turnout, not on the left side. I started to think about that, and I thought, what if Peggy didn't see anything? And what if Conley saw the Rambler being pulled in? Let's say the Zodiacs they have to put the Rambler in the turnout before they drive the teenagers there. So they get into the Rambler, they pull out of the holding area. They're about to make the left into the turnout. They look down the hill. They see the hunters pulling out of the Marshall Ranch turnout. They pull into the gate number 10 turnout, shut off their lights, and lower their heads so that when William duck their heads down, when when Robert Conley is passing, he sees the Rambler on the right side because they just pulled in there, but he doesn't see anybody inside the Rambler. Okay, and remember, all of these witnesses, none of these witnesses knows that there's going to be a double murder in the turnout that night. This is just like casual testimony that they gave about something that wasn't terribly significant until the murders happened. So William Conley and Frank Gasser leave the area. It's about 11:05. Maybe it's a little bit earlier than that. Maybe it's 11:03 or 11:04. James Owen leaves his house. His cuckoo clock says 11 o'clock. The police find that his clock is actually 6 minutes fast. So he leaves his house at 10:54 p.m. If you assume that the distance from James Owen's house on Minnie Drive, I think it was 1735 Minnie Drive, to the gate number 10 turnout it's variously described by Google Maps as being 9.7 miles, 9.5 miles, 9.4 miles, 9.2 miles. I believe in 2015, when I did the calculation, Google Maps had it as 9 miles. So I had James Owen passing the turnout at 11:09:25. Depending on how far the turnout was from his house and what roads he took before he got on the Lake Herman Road, and which estimate is better. James Owen could have passed the turnout as early as 11:07 and as late as 11:10. If you split the difference between all of the estimates, I have James Owen passing the turnout at 11:09. Okay, it doesn't matter if he's a minute later than that. All that means is the Zodiacs had a little bit less time to kill the victims. If he's as early, let's say, as 11:07, then it's a little bit of a tight window between the hunters seeing the Rambler on the right side of the turnout. The Zodiacs would have had to park the Rambler, go back through the 50 yards of the field, get into the white Chevy Impala, pull out, drive it the short distance to the turnout, pull in beside the to the right of the Rambler, and do all of that within the space of whatever, 2.5 minutes, which is a little bit of a tight fit. But if the hunters are leaving at 11:03 or 11:04, it's very doable. So it's a reasonable estimate that when Robert Conley pulls past the turnout, the Zodiacs have just pulled the Faraday Rambler into the turnout, ducked down. Robert Conley continues east along Lake Herman Road, goes all the way out to to the end of the road to Highway 680. The Zodiacs park the the Rambler on the left side of the turnout, the eastern side of the turnout. They walk back through to the holding area, which is 50 yards through the field. They get into the white Chevy Impala, and presumably One of them was staying with the teenagers at all time and holding them at gunpoint. They all get into the white Chevy Impala. They pull out onto the road, go the 50 yards or so to the turnout, pull up into the turnout, and now the white Chevy Impala is parked, whatever, let's say 10 feet to the right of the Rambler, which has nobody inside it. Everybody, the three Zodiacs, Penn, Gareth Penn, Michael O'Hare, and David and Betty Lou are all inside the white Chevy Impala. Maybe Penn or Michael O'Hare starts to get out of the get out through the passenger door, sees the headlights from James Owen's car, gets back into the car, tells everybody to duck down. They force the teenagers to duck down, or maybe the teenagers are in the trunk. I don't know. But they all duck down in the car. James Owen passes the two cars. I don't think either car registered on James Owen. I don't think he particularly noticed either the car that was to the right of the Rambler or the Rambler itself. I think if both cars had been gone the next morning, I don't think James Owen would have been able to describe the Rambler. I think he knew that the Rambler was there because the Rambler was still there when the police arrived. So they knew what one of the cars looked like. I don't think either car, frankly, registered on James Owen. James Owen passes the turnout, sees the two cars at about 11:09 p.m. And when he's about 30 seconds past the turnout, he hears a single shot. I believe what happened is the Zodiacs pull Betty Lou and David out of the back seat or out of the trunk of the car. They David is pulled up close to where the Rambler is. Michael O'Hare is between David and the car. He's holding David at gunpoint. He has the gun against his left earlobe. This is actually my right earlobe, so it would be this side, but it's orientated on the screen differently. But Michael holds the gun against David's left earlobe while he's holding his sleeve or holding his arm. And Michael is in between David and the station wagon. He fires a shot into the left side of David's head, such that the bullet is going from left to right with a slight forward slant through David's head. David immediately collapses vertical or perpendicular to the car. Betty Lou screams. Betty Lou is being held, let's say, by Penn while all this is going on. Then they get Betty Lou ready to get shot. Penn tells Betty Lou to begin running. He says run or what have you. Betty Lou starts running. Betty Lou is shot 5 times in the back, and by Michael. She gets 33 feet 9 inches from the rear of the station wagon. She falls directly backward. She is 5'3", which means she is then found 28 feet 6 inches from the rear of the station wagon. So one of the things that happens as a result of is a miscalculation on the part of the Zodiacs is that when Penn, or it could have been Gareth, but let's say it was lets go of Betty Lou Jensen, a .22 will fire, presumably, will have a smaller radius for gunshot residue than a more powerful weapon because there's more of an explosion. So you get this gunshot residue, which is like confetti coming out of the gun as it is fired. Betty Lou gets a single grain of the gunshot residue near the uppermost part of the uppermost wound on her back. Now, Dennis Bird, who is a criminologist for SCSO, or I think for California CI&I, was trying to explain why there was gunshot residue on Betty Lou's back. And one of the things he suggested was, he said, well, maybe the bullet itself carried the GSR to her back. That's not logical because for that to happen, it would mean that somehow the gunshot residue hitched a ride on the bullet, but it jumped off before it actually landed. The GSR was not found in the uppermost wound on Betty Lou's back. It was found near the wound. Okay, so somehow it dislocated itself from the bullet when it got there. Basically, what this means is that Betty Lou, even though David Faraday fell perpendicular to the car and David was almost 6 feet tall, somehow Betty Lou was closer than that, was about half that distance, was 3 feet or closer when the gun went off, and that's the only way she could have gotten GSR on her back. The other thing that argues against that is the speed at which Betty Lou Jensen was moving. If Betty Lou was shot 5 times, that means that there were 4 intervals of between shots. In other words, there's an interval between the first and second shot. There's an interval between the second and third shots. There's an interval between the third and fourth shots. There's an interval between the fourth and fifth shots. So there are 4 intervals, and Betty Lou eventually moved. Let's use the smaller smaller estimate, and say Betty Lou moved 28 feet. And let's assume that the shots were roughly 1 second apart, which seems reasonable. Pow, 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 something like that. Okay, that was probably a little bit too fast, but if that's the case, if you're talking about roughly 1 second for each shot, and there are 4 intervals, and you're talking about a distance of 28 feet, what that means is Betty Lou Jensen was moving 7 feet per second away from the shooter. Okay, so she was moving very quickly. How did she get GSR on her back? The other problem is all of the shots hit Betty Lou in her back, which means she had already turned to run when the shooter started firing at her. When you're running from somebody who's firing a gun at you, do you swivel in place? Do you suddenly do one of these? No. You would take like a giant step to your left, let's say, and another giant step away from the shooter. And as I said, Betty Lou Jensen, once she started moving, was moving like at 7 feet per second away from the shooter. So how likely is it that Betty Lou would still have been within 3 feet of the shooter after she's already turned away from the shooter, taken 2 giant steps away from the shooter, and she's moving at 7 feet per second away from the shooter, yet somehow she still has GSR on her back? And in my opinion, that could only happen if she had been held by a second killer. So the ballistics in the Lake Herman in the gate number 10 turnout argue that there was more than one killer. If there wasn't more than one killer, then Betty Lou Jensen was cooperating in her own murder. because she was allowing somebody basically to, if if a single killer had grabbed David Faraday, and we know that the shell casing from the shot into David Faraday's head landed on the right front floorboard of the Rambler. In other words, they were right beside the car when he got shot. Betty Lou could have been halfway down the hill by the time the gunman is in a pitch dark alley, and he's firing a gun that has a a flashlight attachment to him. So he's got to locate where Betty Lou is before he starts shooting. She could have been, certainly she could have gotten to the road. If she was running towards the gate number 10, she could have gotten to the gate before the killer started shooting at her, but she didn't. She was within 3 feet. That's what the gunshot residue said. It's another example of something which, if you bend over backwards, you can maybe find an explanation for. But how many things do you have to explain away? How many weird things have to happen on Lake Herman Road? You had an Eagle Scout in David Faraday who was already going to be at least half an hour late for his curfew because for whatever reason, wherever he was before he went out to Lake Herman Road, he decides to relocate out there for no apparent reason. David Faraday said prior to his date, when he was talking to Sharon Hensland, that his intent was to give Betty Lou his class ring and ask her to go steady with him. He still had the ring in the hospital when he was DNA. The ring was still clutched in his fingers. How did that happen? How does David Faraday still have the ring in his hand when the whole purpose of having the date was to give her the ring, ask her to go steady with him? How long do you say that they were making out in the car? An hour, 2 hours? He wasn't able to give her the ring in all of that time? How does Betty Lou have a full bladder? Her having a full bladder is consistent with her being abducted and held someplace, and not being able to do anything about it, not being able to suggest to David, hey, why don't we go back to my parents' house? And there are two positives to that. The first is we'll get back there before the curfew so we don't turn into pumpkins and my parents don't object to your ever seeing me again. Number one. Number two, I can use the bathroom. So David still had the ring that he was going to give Betty Lou. Betty Lou's bladder was full. When the Benicia PD came into the turnout and they checked the engine, it was lukewarm. It wasn't, you would have thought that if they had been cuddling in the car for an hour or two, the engine should have been red hot. And if they had shut the engine off, then the windows of the car should have been frosted over. If you have two people on a night when it is below freezing inside a car, and you have the heater off, the windows are going to frost over. So there are all these bizarre events that happen on Lake Herman Road, and there's no apparent explanation for them. You have people pointing to, well, the seat in the Rambler was reclined. It was reclined, according to the police report, it was reclined at 45 degrees. Very simple. The Zodiacs shoot the two victims. They go over to the Rambler. They leave the passenger door open. They fire 2 shots into the left side of the Rambler, into the rear window and into the header above the door on the passenger side. They turn the they turn the ignition on, they turn the heater on. If they're going to go that far, it wouldn't take very much thought to reach over and incline the seat so that so that people think that they were cuddling in the car. The problem is, if Robert Conley didn't see them because they were there because the seat was inclined, and James Owen didn't see them, how did the Zodiac killer see them when he was passing? I mean, if he was in a big hurry to find victims, how did he know that the car that he saw parked didn't? I mean, a white Chevy Impala had been parked there for 40 minutes earlier, and there wasn't anybody inside it. How did he know that there were people inside? There are so many weird things that happened on Lake Herman Road that night that you have to ask yourself, how many weird things have to happen before a Zodiac hobbyist will say, hey, I think something strange was going on. We have the same thing happen in Riverside that happened on Lake Herman Road, which is you have Sherry Bates not being seen inside the library, leaving her car so that the doors are open, the windows are down, her books and her notepad are on the passenger seat, the key is still in the ignition. You have the problem of her stomach not being empty when the medical examiner does the autopsy. She isn't seen by anyone after 6:15 p.m. No one sees her in the library. No one sees her trying to start her car for an hour and a half after the library closes. All she had to do, if she couldn't start her car, was walk over to one of the public payphones and call her dad and say, hey, I can't start the car. Can you pick me up? How many weird things have to happen before people posting on Zodiac Killer message boards, before people doing websites and doing interviews with other people and psychoanalyzing the Zodiac Killer? How many weird things have to happen in the crimes themselves before some of those people, could I have just one person step forward and say, hey, too many weird things happened. I think we should start smelling a rat. The Riverside crime, the Riverside murder, the murder of Sherry Bates was staged. It was planned ahead of time. Sherry Bates was abducted circa 6:20 p.m. right after she parked her car that night. She was then held for about 4 hours. She was brought back to the alley where she was murdered. As I said, she was murdered by two people who kind of wrestled her to the ground. One held her from the front, pinning her arms to her sides, while Michael O'Hare cut her throat from the rear, from behind her. And that's how the murder took place. The suggestion that the murder took place the way the confession letter suggested did is frankly ridiculous. And I keep saying, let's see a case theory from somebody just showing me in detail how this could have happened. It hasn't happened. I haven't seen one yet, and I don't expect to see one. Same thing with Lake Herman Road. David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen were abducted circa 9 p.m. in Blue Rock Springs Park. They were then kept in a holding area to the east of, about 50 yards to the east of the gate number 10 turnout. And then brought, again, circa just after 9 o'clock, just after 11 o'clock, they were brought back to the turnout and murdered there. And as I've suggested, as was suggested by the detective on Mike Butterfield's board many years ago, several of the Zodiac murders appear to have been timed so that they took place when the local police agencies would have been in the middle of a shift, where police would be coming back to their station, and that actually happened. Obviously, it happened on Lake Herman Road because Bidou and Armena were pulling back into the parking lot when they heard the APB. Part of that was for that reason. It was to reduce the likelihood that the killers would be interrupted by and risk a drive-by. So all of these weird things that have happened are just waved away. Why would a car be parked in the gate number 10 turnout if, as other people have suggested, Robert Conley was right when he says that he was actually on the road at 9 p.m. And he and Bingo Wesner saw the white Chevy Impala at 9 p.m. and at 10 p.m. Then you're suggesting that the light-colored Chevrolet that ran William Crowe off the road, and the white Chevy Impala that was seen by Robert Conley and Bingo Wesner, and presumably by Frank Gasser, and the Chevy Impala that had two people inside it that was seen by Stan, the 14-year-old, pulling off Lake Herman Road onto Columbus Parkway and heading towards Blue Rock Springs. You're suggesting that all three of those cars were driven by different people. And the Solano County Sheriff's Office in the newspapers asked people who were on Lake Herman Road that night to come forward. Pretty much everybody who was within a mile or so of the turnout that night did come forward. The only examples of people who didn't come forward were the ones I just cited. And I'm assuming that the light-colored Chevy that ran William Crowe off the road and the white Chevy Impala that was seen by multiple witnesses parked in the turnout, and the Impala that pulled off the road and was seen by Stan, the 14-year-old, at circa 10:35 p.m., that those were all the same car. And it was the same car that was parked beside the Rambler that was seen by James Owen at 11:09. If that driver or drivers didn't come forward, that makes perfect sense because that's the Zodiac killer, okay? If those were all different drivers, we understand why the person who was parked parallel to the Rambler didn't come forward. But why didn't the other three drivers come forward? Doesn't that seem weird? Okay. All I can do is look at the evidence, tell you what I see, and on the day that people who think otherwise actually put together a case theory that explains away some of the weird events that happened on the road that night. I look forward to that day. But that day is never going to happen because they can't do it. That's the problem. And it's the same reason, here's another mystery we can solve. It's the same reason that when Ned DeHaan and I asked people to come forward, asked Mike Butterfield, Thomas Horan, who else? Richard Grinnell, to come forward and debate me on, in this kind of a format on Ned's, with Ned as the moderator, okay? They won't do it. And they're never going to do it. And the reason for it is they're going to lose. And when they lose, it won't be because I'm such a brilliant debater. It's because the way I look at the evidence is the correct way. I don't have any preconceptions. I look at what's there and I tell you what I think, okay? It is people like Richard Grinnell has this preconception that the Zodiac killer was one person and he's this sad little man and he was driving around. Isn't it amazing, by the way, that the Zodiac killer never trolled for victims? Ted Bundy got caught in, I think it was in August of 1975, and he got caught because he was trolling for victims. Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, got caught. He had He was caught with a woman of the night, but he was seeking victims. The Zodiac killer never has to do that somehow. Um, he pulls into places where the victims are already made. There's no circling of the victim, like an insect, or a beast of prey, waiting for the a victim to show up, and as Ted Bundy did. There isn't any need to do that. It's just like the victims are there. He kills the victims. He changes somehow. He changes not just his modus operandi, but he also changes his weapon each time. He changes. He has a 22 at Lake Herman Road. He's a 9 millimeter at on Blue Rock Springs Park. Serial killers don't normally do that. Okay, so uh, I don't want to go on forever here, but when people on Zodiac Killer message boards stop trying to psychoanalyze this Santa Claus victim that they've invented, Santa Claus killer that they've invented, they stop trying. Oh, this guy seems to love publicity and he hates the cops. Okay, how about looking at the crimes and trying to figure out what's true and what isn't? Okay, you might want to start with that. Okay, just just a suggestion from somebody who's this is the reason why I didn't go online for 10 years. I didn't go online till 2010 because I was expecting this sort of thing. Anyway, that's most of what I have to say about Lake Herman Road. Maybe I'll put up another video shortly to add some things. If I don't do that, I will move on to Blue Rock Springs Park in the next video. I very much appreciate people watching. I don't mean to be a hard guy. I appreciate people watching my videos. I know they go on forever, but I'm trying to pack as much information as possible. If you disagree with me and you're watching my video, I appreciate your doing that. I appreciate your taking the time to watch it. Like most people, like Tom Voight, like Mike Morford, like most of us who have been involved in pursuing the case for over a long period of time. I feel very strongly about what I say. Sometimes maybe I go over the top, but as I said, I appreciate people watching these videos, and I will come back with a video. I will be interested in doing one on Blue Rock Springs because I'm not going to do a timeline. I'm just going to mention like 2 or 3 aspects. I don't think a timeline is necessary because it was kind of a hit and run. But there are 2 or 3 aspects of the crime that I think are worth talking about, and I just have to find the insert point here where I can turn the video off. Okay, so thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you soon.